So let's take a look at what we saw during the spring game, the positive and the negative. First and foremost, keep in mind that the spring game is only a practice, as it's just one of the 15 practices they're allowed during all of spring. So let's not take too much into this, good or bad, as some players are new, nerves set in as they're in front of 66,000 plus fans. They're wanting to look good for their coaches, or they're just not having a good day. That's kind of what I saw in Eric Gilbert. He's had a great spring this year, but on this day, he did not have a good day. He had a couple of drops that hit him right in the hands, which isn't typical for Gilbert. So you could see it could be a lot of things. So let's not hold too much against these players for one bad practice. Also, keep in mind that you're never going to be totally satisfied in these spring games, as if the defense shines and looks great, usually means the offense was disappointing. And if the offense looks great, then usually the defense was disappointing. It would be really hard to have both sides shine and look good when they're going up against each other. Another thing also about the game is that the weather didn't cooperate. It felt more like a late October, November game with temperatures being in the 40s, along with a 20 mile per hour northerly wind that dropped the wind chill down into the 20s. And keep in mind, a lot of these players are not used to playing in this kind of weather, on top of trying to learn a new system, new position, or something like that. To me, overall, the white team, which was your first teamers and your potential starters for the season, looked promising, and that was on both sides of the ball. And that's kind of what we need to look at. The blocking, the catching, the throwing, the decision making. That's the kind of things you want to see. Do you see improvements over the last few years in this area? And to me, we saw a lot of improvement. It looked promising on both sides of the ball, from Jeff Sims in the quarterback position to Billy Kemp and Marcus Washington in the receiver position, to a trio of running backs that I feel is going to be a really big beneficial having them all year during the season. Let's talk about what I thought was a big plus during the game, and I feel is going to be a strength this coming season, and that's the defense. A few players really stuck out during this game. One is MJ Sherman, the transfer out of Georgia, who to me lived up to what we saw on his film, and he's the real deal. He created havoc of the offensive line most of the day. He blew up a few plays and made it look pretty easy at times. The other was Nash Hutmacher. I see a big improvement in this guy's play from last year, as I watched him bitch slap a veteran center and Ben Scott multiple times during the game. His stats might not show it, but he is the reason on multiple plays why other defenders got the big play behind the line. Every time I looked up, he was pushing the center back 2 or 3 yards into the backfield. I also saw a trio of freshmen that really looked good during the game, including Prince. Let's hope I don't uh, butcher his name. Umawellen. Prince Llewellyn, who had 4 tackles, 3 of them for a loss. Also, freshman Cameron Linhart had 4 tackles himself. And linebacker Maverick Noonan. All these 3 freshmen looked really good, and I could see why they've been running and playing with the first teamers in practice. And I could see them. All 3 of these players look really good, and I could see all of them playing extensively this season. The secondary did okay, but it was really hard to get a feel on the secondary, just because the day was consistently mostly to me of the run. But overall, I thought they did pretty good. They did have a couple of INTs and a fumble recovery for a touchdown, even though you and I both know that fumble recovery would have been overturned in a real game. Harburg's arm was definitely going forward on that play. So that wouldn't have counted in a real game. So there's one turnover you could almost take away from all the mess you saw already. Another transfer we need to talk about is Elijah Judy. He's the transfer out of Texas A&M, and I feel Judy could end up as one of the starters by the end of the fall camp with Wynn and Robinson rotating in. But I definitely feel all three of these players are going to be a big contributor this year on the defensive line. Is you're definitely going to need in this position on the D line position. You need depth and must rotate throughout the game to keep everyone fresh and to kind of get that push on the offensive line. But Judy is going to be hard to keep off the field. On the offensive side of the ball, I feel quarterback Jeff Sims really looked good. He really looked good and really comfortable out there. He didn't seem like a player that just transferred in. He made some great reads and scrambled out of the pockets nicely throughout the day. He hit Marcus Washington a couple times on some great option reads. His decision making looked good, and his passes seemed to be pretty accurate for the most part. I feel if he needs to work on anything, it's keeping his eyes downfield when he scrambles out, especially as he scrambles. To me, he seems to want to run first once he's forced out of the pocket. An example is when he was pressured and made that nice pirouette and rolled out to his left. He seemed to look to run rather than look downfield to throw the ball. That to me is what makes Casey Thompson so good and ultimately will help Casey win the starting job this year. That's kind of how I feel about it. Casey's really good at scrambling out, but always looking downfield, and even when he's forced out of the pocket, he's still looking for that open receiver as he's scrambling out. Examples that Northwestern game where he found IGC downfield for about a 40-yard gain after running for his life in that backfield. I know a lot of these media sites keep saying that the job is Sims because Rhule handpicked Sims and brought him to Lincoln. That Sims is Rhule's guy, but like I said in my other videos, they didn't have to go get Casey as he was already here. So there was no need to go get him. Rhule did have a long conversation with Casey Thompson and emphasized how much he wanted Casey to stay on the team. And to me, that's the same thing as going and getting him, as that's all they had to do to keep Casey. So this quarterback battle to me is up for grabs for both players, for Sims and Thompson. And I feel the one who wins the starting job is going to be the one that doesn't turn the ball over during fall camp. That's going to win. But either way it goes, and whoever ends up, I believe it's going to be a close, tight battle. And at the end, I feel Rhule will probably use both quarterbacks this season, and it wouldn't surprise me if you don't see them both play in the same game at times. Other notables during the spring game, especially on the quarterback side, Harburg looked really good, really comfortable running the read option. I can see what the coaches were talking about. His strong suit is that run game. He's a very physical. It seems like he has a good feel of when to run. I could definitely see what the coaching staff was talking about when it comes to that. He definitely needs to work on his passing game, as his passes were all over the place, as some of them look pretty pathetic at times. If he could get his passing game down, and he has all year to work on this, and even the off season of next year, because he's not going to be starting this year. If he's starting a game, then we've got two quarterbacks that went down. If he could do that, he definitely could be in the running for a starting job come next year. The last quarterback I want to talk about is Chubba Purdy. As Purdy to me didn't look bad. He actually looked pretty decent. His numbers don't show it, as he was the benefactor of all the drop passes, especially the passes from Gilbert or the passes to Gilbert and a couple receivers. If them passes weren't dropped, he would have had some impressive numbers, and he made some good decisions to out of the pocket and to take off running. So Purdy looked pretty decent too. To me, the question with Purdy is, did he do enough to keep him in the quarterback loop? I feel for this year, Purdy will end up probably being the number 3 quarterback, the third string quarterback behind Casey Thompson and Jeff Sims. I know they have Harburg number 3 right now, but by the end of fall, I believe Purdy will probably hold that number 3 spot. I don't see Purdy transferring, but it's a possibility. Hopefully he won't, but it's a possibility. But if he don't transfer, I think he'll probably hold that number 3 spot. Speaking of transferring, sources of mine have heard that Stephon Wynn is going to transfer, which I'm not sure why he would. He had a decent spring game, and he's going to be one of the D line starters and get plenty of playing time. Like I said, you need that depth in that D line, and so I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I trust the source that gave me that information. So we'll see. I surely hope he doesn't leave, because that would be a big blow to this team. If he leaves, there's got to be something else going on, because it definitely can't be because of playing time. So if he leaves, I'm wondering what else is kind of going on there to make him want to leave. Let's talk about the running backs. The running backs are probably going to be our strongest position, especially on the offense for sure. As long as we get that solid O line play, that line can improve and do a decent job this year, then it looks very promising. As we saw a solid 4 during this spring that played extremely well in Grant, Gabe Urban, Ramir Johnson, and A.J. Allen. Grant to me still looked to be the number one that will start. To me, he looked like the Grant of last year. And like I said in previous videos, to me, Grant is my starter until otherwise proven. And that's where I'm leaning. Gabe Irvin had some nice runs and is making great progress. But the running back I felt that had the biggest improvement in what I saw in this game during the spring game was Ramir Johnson. He really impressed me during this game. To me, he ran with authority. He looked really good doing it, his decision making, hitting the gaps. And even A.J. Allen looked really good. His stats might not show it, but he ran very well and even caught a couple passes out of the backfield for 22 yards. So them 4 guys are going to make a big impact, because you kind of need that depth to keep everybody fresh and come that fourth quarter be able to pound that rock, close out some of these games that maybe we lost last year in the fourth quarter. So I believe all 4 of these backs will make a big impact this season, as long as that offensive line holds up. And moving to the offensive line, the line looked okay. Don't get me wrong. The line had some great pushes, especially at the beginning of the game. The running game looked pretty decent. I saw some great push from the offensive line. I didn't see any communication problems, and there weren't many mistakes. I didn't see any penalty-wise problems like we've seen in the past. So I feel it's a work in progress, and I see them working things out and making progress. So I think Rhule's got it down. Him and Rayola's making progress with this line, and so I think they're on the right track. I do feel the D line pushed around the offensive line at times, but other than that, it's not perfect. But it's a start, and they're making progress. I did see some progress, and for overall, I think they did okay. The sad thing is that the O line is the most experienced position that returns this year, and yet they still at times looked overmatched during the game. And a lot of this came against them trio of true freshmen that did that damage. And you're thinking these are 3 guys that were in high school last year. Surely hope Rhule has the answers for this offensive line. To the wide receivers had some shining moments in Billy Kemp the fourth, as he had a couple of catches and looked really elusive once he had the ball in his hands. Marcus Washington had flashes at times, so I feel we're going to be okay in the receiver position. Tight ends looked pretty good as well. And like I said before, I know Eric Gilbert had a couple of drops and didn't have a very good day. Matter of fact, it might have been one of his worst days. He might even tell you it might have been one of his worst days ever, in practice or not. To me, that's just one practice, and we don't always shine every day when we're practicing or even playing. But I know the coaches have said he's been looking really good in all the other practices, and I feel he's still going to be one of our starters along with Fedoni. The surprise was Nate Borkshire, I believe it is. Nate Borkshire had the best day of the tight ends of the three, with 3 receptions for 44 yards, including a nice pass from Sims up the middle for 38 yards. So the tight end position is another position we're going to be just fine in. Another thing everyone should have noticed is that the tackling looked really crisp and really good throughout the team. Even when we got deep into the depth chart, if you notice, the tackling was crisp. They swarmed to the ball. And since you didn't call it out, tackling is one of those things, kind of like insurance, You have insurance, you pay on insurance, you forget about it, don't think nothing of it until something's wrong and you need it. And that's the same with tackling. If you notice, the tackling was crisp. Like I said, they swarmed to the ball. So if you're not noticing problems in there, then you know they're doing their job. This is something we haven't seen much in the last few years, but it gets easily overlooked. Sharp tackling could easily make a difference in a close game. And you know how many close games, you've heard about all the close games we've had, how many one-score losses we had in the last couple of years. And sharp tackling takes something that could be second and a loss, second and 12 to now second and 2 because we missed a couple of tackles. So it's great to see that the tackling's really looking good. Now, I know there were 8 turnovers in the game, and yes, that's definitely not a good thing. But again, it was a nasty day, and I don't want everyone to look into this too much, as I feel this won't be a problem this year. For one, Rhule just won't go for it. And the other, we also want to give kudos to the defense, as their play might have had a lot to do with some of these turnovers. So we can look at the positive side when it comes to these turnovers. The turnovers were also, to me, were not from any potential starters from what I saw. I know one was on that forward pass from Harburg that they called a fumble for a touchdown, which we know for a fact would have been ruled incomplete. So there's one you could take away. And I don't want everyone to harp on it. I know a lot of times when you see 8 turnovers on the stat sheet, you have a tendency to overreact. But they still, don't get me wrong, they still need to be cleaned up. But I see a lot of them on the backups, the third strings, and even later in the depth I saw. And I know there was a couple on the white, but that's when you saw the backups coming in and playing. The turnover, I think, was from Purdy when he went over there and played on the white squad. I like to talk about the XFL version of the kickoffs that they did, as it's something I hope the rest of the college football looks into, as it's definitely a safer version on kickoffs. To me, it's just as entertaining. But the one thing it does, it teaches the players how to block and how to shed block. This is how we used to practice blocking. We would line up 5 yards apart, and one would block while the other one tries to shed the block. This is how you practice blocking. And I think it's a great way. I'm really hoping not only that college football looks into this, doing this, but maybe even the NFL, and you cut down on them high collision injuries if they're trying to make this game safer. That, to me, is a big one they could go to. So you can see there were a lot of good things out of this spring game, and it wasn't all bad. Like they always say, it's never as bad as you think, and it's never as good as you think. So try to look at the positive sides during this spring game, and I think you'll feel a lot better about what's coming up this summer and this fall. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Go Big Red.